Welcome back to English 111. As I discussed last week, when reading literature, scholars divide the text into groups known as literary movements, based on the time period and the characteristics of the writing. During the early 19th century, the major literary movement was called Romanticism. Romanticism was marked by emotion, heavy symbolism, and a focus on the individual. It tended to idealize the world, or in the case of Gothic Romanticism, offer a fantastical version of it. We saw an example of this in the Cask of Amontillado. Poe presents you with a dark and confusing tale of murder, and he presents it from the first-person perspective of the killer. The story doesn't feature the ghosts and haunted houses of many Gothic stories. Instead, Poe's horror comes from the killer who offers no reasonable explanation for his action, and who invites us, the readers, into his madness. This is what we call an unreliable narrator. He's our only access to the world, and he even addresses us directly. But how can we trust anything that he says? The horror of this story is that the killer is entirely human. He's just like us in a lot of ways, and yet he carefully, coldly bricks a man into a wall and leaves him to die. He even seems to enjoy listening to the pleas of his victims. Poe seems to be asking, what's the difference between a man and a monster? The Yellow Wallpaper is actually dealing with similar issues. An unreliable narrator, Gothic spaces, questions of mental illness. But rather than telling the story from the perspective of the villain, Gilman makes the reader ask, is there a villain? The narrator's husband John becomes the focus of this question as we, and the narrator, wonder whether John is well-intentioned but misguided, actively harmful, or actually correct. There are definitely issues of misogyny at play as the narrator's needs, experiences, and desires are actively dismissed, but there's also clearly something wrong here. Do John's good intentions count, or does he bear responsibility for what happened to his wife? The Story of an Hour looks at the issue of female oppression with even more nuance because the wife here openly admits her husband is a good man and that she even loves him in a way. But the desperate sense of hope and freedom that she feels when she hears of his death suggests that even the kindest oppression is still devastating for those who are stripped of their independence and choices. Can you be happy if you have no autonomy? Chopin seems to be saying no. Finally, Stephen Crane tackles this issue of self-determination by looking not at societal restrictions, but at natural ones. What happens when the thing you can't control is the world in which you live? You probably noticed the way that the sea in an open boat is made to seem alive and aware. That's a technique called personification, where you give something inanimate the characteristics of a human. Like her unreliable narrators, this is a character who we'll never fully understand. Why does it kill one and spare another? It's notable that the one character who is given a name, Billy, is the one person who does not survive. Crane gives him the most humanity, but that can't save him. The world in Crane's view doesn't care about your family, your life, or how hardworking you are. Billy did nothing wrong. He died anyway. What these stories all have in common is an attempt to understand the world in which we live. How do you explain inexplicable human cruelty? Do your intentions outweigh your impact? How do you live in a society that ignores your needs and dismisses your desires? And how do you survive in a world that you can't control? As you turn your attention to this week's readings, try to figure out what questions these authors are grappling with. We'll pick up there in the next video.